The Free Enterprise Society was formed over 30 years ago by a group of individuals who were very concerned about the simultaneous expansion of bureaucracy, erosion of individual rights, and plunder of private wealth by slick government debt and taxing schemes. Their mission is to promote free enterprise worldwide and restore lost liberties and freedoms in America under the organic national constitution of the Republic of the United States of America. To further their goals, the Free Enterprise Society arranges training and seminars to educate the people across the country. Washington State Representative Matt Shea. Matt Shea's family has lived in eastern Washington for 4 generations. His family ran the first stagecoach, as the story goes, from Walla Walla to Colville, Washington. Matt grew up in Spokane Valley, attending both Pasadena and Ponderosa elementary schools. Prior to graduating cum laude from Gonzaga Law School, Matt earned both his BA in History and Political Science from Gonzaga University while completing ROTC. Matt is currently practicing at Casey Law Offices, PS, in Spokane, Washington. He is admitted to practice in Washington, the Eastern Washington Federal District Court, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Matt Shea has served his country in the United States Army with 2 combat tours overseas, including 8 months in Bosnia as a platoon leader and 11 months in Baghdad, Iraq, as a company commander. Matt was awarded both a Bronze Star and Meritorious Service Medal, among many other awards and commendations. Matt began his military service as a distinguished military graduate from Gonzaga in 1996 and finished in the top 3 of his officer basic course class. Currently, Matt is a lifetime member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and current member of the American Legion. Matt was named Rookie Legislator of the Year, 2009. Currently, Matt serves as Vice Chairman for the Eastern Washington Army Advisory Board. Matt Shea was the co-founder of the Washington Family Foundation, which later merged with the Family Policy Institute of Washington. Matt is an allied attorney with the Alliance Defense Fund, a national network of attorneys dedicated to preserving religious freedom.
The next speaker I met when I was in with Valley Forge. We were at another convention, and I was sitting there at one of the events, and Representative Charles Key comes up and sits next to me. He's a representative from Oklahoma that I know. He's been out at our convention before. And soon thereafter, another representative came up, Matt Shea, which I did not know at that time. And then I saw him speak when I was out there, and I was very, very impressed. You know, the states can really do a lot. You've heard, of course, the states are suing the government. Well, I'm glad you're standing up, but see, I like what Matt is doing better. I think you'll appreciate it. Going into the federal court and asking permission to have the power that you already have is what the states are doing. If you understand what I'm saying. What Washington more or less is doing is saying, hey, you don't have this power, and we're not participating. And he'll go into details of that, but I really like the approach. And I mean, to me, this is one of the most exciting things going on in the paper movement, because if you think about it, that can clear up income tax, and can clear up cap and trade. They can pass it. They won't mean anything. You see, it's just everybody's going to ignore it. And a bunch of other bills can just be, you know, they can act like they're doing something in Washington, D.C., and they have really no power if the states exercise their power. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm excited to see the states doing this. I mean, I don't see how the federal government could stop it other than bringing an army against Washington. And I think that would be a mistake. I think people would frown on that. Anyway, he's been elected or the Rookie of the Year legislator, but I really enjoy talking to him. I mean, he's just really a regular guy who believes in the Constitution, believes in freedom, and I think you'll really enjoy him. Please help me welcome Representative Matt Shea.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and I guess I want to start off by giving my brief background, because when I saw the MIAC report, I thought, well, hey, that's pretty much me. So I am a Christian, gun-owning, pro-life, combat veteran. So I think that covers pretty much everything. So I want to thank you for having me down here in California. And you know, every time I think that Washington State has it bad and we're leaning so far left we're going to tip into the Pacific Ocean, y'all down here in California have been swimming around the ocean for quite a while. So it lifts my spirits to come down here. I want to tell you, I saw something earlier about pensions and what we should do as representatives. Should we take and have a retirement? And my answer to that is absolutely not, because it shouldn't be a career. So I wanted to practice what I preached. I went down to the office there in the Capitol in Olympia up there in Washington, and I said, I don't want to be enrolled in the pension system in the state of Washington. I tell you what, the look on the lady's face was hilarious. She looked like I just shot her firstborn. And I said, well, I seriously want to do this. And she said, we don't know how. And I said, you're kidding me. No, we don't know how. We've never had anybody ask that before. It took me about 2 or 3 days to get it all ironed out so I could actually opt out of the pension system up there. That is wrong. That should be the exact opposite. So I just wanted to throw that in there and kind of give you a personal story. The things I'm going to be talking about today are on my website, VoteShea, S-H-E-A, 2010.com. It's VoteShea, S-H-E-A, 2010.com. It's called the Step-by-Step Plan for Freedom. Give you a little bit of background. A couple summers ago, some state legislators got together from across the country. And we said, hey, we got to do something. What we see coming is going to destroy the republic. And we want to see a God-honoring constitutional republic restored. We've got to do something. We got together and we came up with this plan. So it's online and you can see it there. I'm going to be talking about some doom and gloom stuff a little bit today. And when I talk about that, I want us to keep focused on the fact that our hope is not in man, our hope is in Jesus Christ. Amen? Amen. All right. So, the 10th Amendment, a line in the sand. And for those of you who don't know, that's a picture from the Alamo, okay? We have all this federal intrusion going on. With healthcare, cap and trade, land management. Up in Washington State, it's a huge deal. Huge swaths of land in Washington, Idaho, and Montana have been seized by the federal government. It is a big deal up there. And they've taken that out of the productive tax rolls, and it's just crushing us. It's crippling us up there. Jobs are, we have unemployment, at least in our county, over 10%. And if you add in the numbers that are correctly or should correctly be calculated, it's probably closer to 20%. So we're the same up there, probably like many of you down here in California. We also have a wolf problem up there, and I chose that because it's so visible, and I'll show you here why in a second. We also have federal inaction with immigration and voting, and I want to give you a couple examples about that as well. So, immigration. I got this email from our Department of Licensing, and this is what the email says, okay? They will accept a customer's signature as proof of residency to get a driver's license. Now, what's the next question they ask you to vote at the DMV? They ask at the DMV, would you like to register to vote, right? Oh, yeah. So how can we know that the folks that are registering to vote are actually citizens? We can't. It's impossible. But this is an actual email from about, 3 months ago now, 4 months ago, where they actually sent this to us. So we are proposing some solutions regarding this, and I'll get to that at the end. So this isn't just about healthcare and cap and trade. Let's talk about wolves. See that wolf there on the left? That's 250 pounds. That guy holding it's 6 feet tall. That animal right there is not native to the United States of America. It's actually from Canada. And it was introduced into the United States, calling it reintroduction, when it never existed down here.
Is it dead?
It is dead, yes. Yeah, I don't think he would... If that was licking his face, I think we'd have a problem there.
He's eating him.
But here's an example. People say that, well, wolves don't harm anything. Well, they've killed people. They killed people in Russia, and they still continue to kill people in Russia. And this is an actual quote from Canada about how a jury sat through 3 days of testimony about somebody being dragged and eaten to death. Government inaction and government action can kill people. And I want to put this up here as a visible depiction of what happens when the government gets involved where it shouldn't. So, I want to start with some principles. Now, Sheriff Mack does a great job talking about these things. I've been on the stage with him a couple times before. I want to reiterate some of these things just because I think it's important to hear it again. But quite simply, the role of government is to protect our God-given unalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. End of story. Period. Period. Well, then I think it's pretty simple. The Constitution limits government. The 10 Commandments limit us. Why are we making our system so complicated? That's what it's about. Free markets. One of the very important principles of a free market is that thousands of individual transactions can better adjust to economic crises than one government action. Right? But yet we believe the other today, and we let it happen. But I want to emphasize something about freedom. It's freedom that creates prosperity. It's freedom that reduces poverty. It's freedom that increases charity. And it's gun ownership that ensures freedom. Again, those are the simple principles. As true as they were in 1776, they are today. So let's talk about the plan, some strategies. I was in the United States Army for 10 years. I served 2 combat tours overseas, one in Bosnia and one in Iraq. I was in the cavalry and then in the infantry later. Attack, attack, attack. We have got to quit playing defense. We need to go on the offense, put the pressure on them, make them react to us. The next is, we seem to be afraid of confrontation, but the point of confrontation is we need to make them act like the tyrants they are. We need to call their bluff, and I'm going to show you how to do that here very specifically in a second, and how we're doing it across the country. I also want to emphasize one thing. We need to start defending freedom locally. And the gentleman that spoke earlier saying you should run for local office, in my district, my legislative district up in Spokane Valley, Washington, we have 51 elected positions. 51. Water districts, sewer districts, school board. Guess what all of those districts have in common? They can tax you. All of them. Why aren't we showing up to those and blocking those attempts to increase taxes? And I want to give you a specific example. We ran somebody for Cemetery Commission. Matt, what's Cemetery Commission? I didn't know. They had a budget of $15,000. We ran somebody for that. They went and knocked on 500 doors. They won by 60% vote against a longtime incumbent, because no one had ever run against the guy. Get in there, and she was the deciding vote. It's a friend of Dr. Lori Ross, actually. She was a deciding vote to block a tax increase in that cemetery district. That's what showing up does. We have to start showing up. And if you don't think you could run for office, come talk to me afterwards. You're wrong. You can run for office. So, the plan. Very simple. 5 steps, 10 bills. Key nullification bills, protecting the Second Amendment, restoring sound and honest money, using the initiative process if you have one, and then lastly, calling on the county sheriff. And Sheriff Mack has done a great job talking about how to do that, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. This is as simple as it really gets, I think, and you can do this all at the state level. So the 10th Amendment, the power is not delegated, to the federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, and the people. And there's 2 cases underneath there. Sheriff Mack talked about one of them, Prince v. U.S., but the other one, New York v. U.S. And they simply reiterated what everybody understood. The court got it right. They didn't make law, they got it right. And we can use this. And a lot of attorneys general across the United States haven't used this in their health care arguments when they're trying to sue the federal government. They haven't used the 10th Amendment to the extent I think they should have. And, by the way, as a citizen legislator, I have a real job as a constitutional attorney when I'm not in session. And we have to get back to that, as somebody said earlier as well. I want to compare it to the Articles of Confederation. Looks pretty similar, doesn't it? Not much really changed, but somehow we think it did. The states created the federal government, and so therefore the federal government was an agent of the states. They never gave away power that they didn't specifically enumerate. They would never have done that. They wouldn't have agreed to the Constitution if they had. Somebody sent me a letter, actually it's a member of this group, somebody sent me a letter, and the argument they gave me was that, Matt, when you talk about these things, the states are not a check in the check and balances system. And I wanted to refute that argument conclusively, because the states are the fourth check and balance in the system, the people are the final check and balance, and I would say a well-armed people are the final check and balance. But I want to read this. I don't normally do this, but because somebody sent me a letter, I want to read this so we can refute this conclusively. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which remain to the state governments are numerous and indefinite. And this is from James Madison. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Is that what it's limited to today? No. I mean, not even close. When then this last part of it, with which last the power of taxation will, for the most part, be connected. What's taxation connected to today? As the Supreme Court's ruled that Social Security is a tax. It's connected to everything today. But not according to what Madison thought. Then he says this: the powers reserved to several states will extend to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger. And then this is the best part of this whole thing. Those are the state governments in times of peace and security. The more adequate, indeed, the federal powers may be rendered to the national defense, the less frequent will be those scenes of danger which might favor their ascendancy over the governments of the particular states. What does that mean? The Founding Fathers only saw the federal government taking charge of things in time of war or danger, not in time of peace. The state governments were always supposed to be more powerful. So, conclusively disproven, I think. So, 10th Amendment primer. The states created the federal government, so the federal government's an agent of the states. But I want you to think about something a little bit differently. If you could determine the boundaries and extent of your own power, who would stop you from expanding it infinitely? Nobody. So why are we thinking the federal government can be the final arbiter, all branches, including the Supreme Court, of the boundaries and extent of the federal government? That in the law is called a conflict of interest. That's why the state governments were supposed to be able to check them, and why Alexander Hamilton, not known as a state-friendly type guy, said that the states could erect barriers against federal encroachment. He said that. But also I think there's a moral right to something called nullification. Nullification is saying, federal government, that law you passed is unconstitutional. We are not going to abide by it. It will be of no force and no effect inside the state boundaries. People say, Matt, you can't do that. Well, I think you can for a couple moral reasons. The first is self-defense. There's a natural right to self-defense, and Thomas Jefferson clearly said that states had that right. That was why states elected senators originally. It was why states had this compromise with the Constitutional Convention to have that ability to elect senators. But also, don't we have a duty to disobey an unlawful order?
Yeah.
I mean, do we really want to be like the Germans? Befehl ist Befehl. An order is an order. You know, I'm just following orders. That wouldn't make us any better than any other country in the history of the world.
About Thoreau, David Thoreau.
The other part of this is the idea of dual sovereignty and federalism. The Founding Fathers created a system of dual sovereignty, which meant that the state governments had a certain amount of powers, the federal government had a certain amount of powers. And if one tried to encroach on the other one, it was the duty of that to shove them back. So states have the right, not only the right, the duty to shove the federal government back into its constitutionally designed box. So dual sovereignty. This is from the Prince case, and I think Sheriff Mack shared it earlier. This separation of the two spheres is one of Constitution's structural protections of liberty. A healthy balance of power between the states and the federal government will reduce the risk of tyranny and abuse from either front. I mean, that's about as clear, I think, as you can get. James Madison, Federalist 51. And again, I added this one too because of the letter that I received. And this is important concept. Notice what he says. It's a compound republic. This is the genius of our system. We have one large republic made up of a bunch of tiny republics. That was the strength, that was the genius. First time in the history of the world that we had done that. First time as humans we had done that. We had these small republics making up a large republic so they could react better to local problems and crises and yet still have the ability at a national level to take on a large foe. It's genius. But it says in the compound republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments. Hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. Now, for the person that wrote me the letter, they said that state governments can't be a check in the system. How can a state control the federal government then? If they can't say that law is unconstitutional? How can they? That, in my opinion, makes that argument that states can't be a check moot and irrelevant. So let's talk about some solutions. I think, and a little bit probably maybe too much exhaustively went through that. This is what we've proposed to do, and I want to give you some encouragement because a lot of states have introduced these. So for the state sovereignty resolution, the whole idea behind that was to put the federal government on notice to cease and desist. That's the whole purpose of the resolution, not to do anything else other than to put the federal government on notice to cease and desist. I believe it's now up to 39 states have introduced a state sovereignty resolution. 39. The next, the Healthcare Freedom Act. We introduced a bill in Washington State last year to nullify nationalized health care in the state of Washington. The more important news is 4 states have now passed that into law. 4. Okay? The next, the Energy Freedom Act, simply nullifies nationalized cap and trade in the state of Washington. Several states have also introduced that as well. Right below there's a little note there. Again, that goes back to the Prince decision. The government, the federal government, cannot compel a state to enact or enforce a federal regulatory program. But that's exactly what cap and trade is, and it's exactly what Obamacare is. The next, and this is the one we're introducing, we introduced last year, we're going to introduce it again. It's the Right to Constitutional Government Act. It simply says this: if you pass a law, federal government, in every law you pass, you must specifically cite the power you think is given to you by the Constitution in that law. If you don't, that law is null and void in the state of Washington. Now, people say, well, you can't do that. Well, actually we can, because it's already in their rules. House Rule 13 actually requires that they do that. They're just not doing it. So we're just making them play by their own rules if it comes down to it.
That's what Arizona's doing.
I'm sorry?
That's what Arizona is doing.
It is.
Their immigration law.
Yeah, and what we've done as state legislators, we're talking, so Russell Pierce, Charlie Key, Sam Rohr, some other legislators throughout the country, we're talking about these things quite a bit. So we're introducing them throughout the country in different states. And I think that's the strategy we have to have, because you may not be able to pass it in Washington or California, but we may in Oklahoma or Idaho. So 4 common arguments. The states can't do that. Well, my question is this: how will it be enforced? And this ultimately is the Achilles heel of the federal government. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources to enforce all these unconstitutional laws. They have to rely on the local governments to do it. So if you don't comply with it locally, what are they going to do to you? And I want to get to some of the issues with that here in a second, some of the ideas we have. But secondly, I like to do this, just because I'll tell a real quick story. And this is how all the funny stories start in Washington. We had a legislator, liberal Democrat from downtown Seattle. And he came up to me and he said, "Matt, really want to support you on this 10th Amendment stuff." I said, I was kind of shocked. I said, "Great. What's the 10th Amendment?" So I've decided now, when somebody tries to do that, I want to ask them all the time, have you read the law? Because you may get a response like this. Go to that law. Have you read the Arizona law?
I've not had a chance to, I've glanced at it, I've not read it.
It's 10 pages. It's a lot shorter than the healthcare bill, which was 2,000 pages long.
I think the potential for racial profiling is certainly increased by the passage of such law.
I've not had a chance to, I've glanced at it, I've not.
Isn't that embarrassing? That's the Attorney General of the United States. Hasn't read the law. So, if you ever get stuck in a quandary, ask them if they've read the law, because usually they haven't. Then you hear this argument, well, this is about secessionism or racism. We heard that up in Washington State. They leveled that charge against us, and then we were ready for it. We turned around and said, did you know that actually nullification was used by the abolitionists first regarding fugitive slave laws? Did you know that? It was actually used by the abolitionists in the North, Pennsylvania in particular. They said, we aren't going to enforce fugitive slave laws because we think it's wrong. We think it's unconstitutional. And they did it. Well, that kind of shut that argument down. And then we've heard a couple arguments, specifically, well, if Congress passes a law, it's the supreme law of the land, so you can't nullify it. Heard that. David Barton actually takes kind of that view. Then you hear also judicial supremacy. Well, only the judiciary can determine when a law is unconstitutional, right, or constitutional. I want to blow those out of the water here in just a second. So I got this. I always like specific examples. This is from the Idaho Attorney General. Okay, in his letter, he puts these two arguments in the letter. Here's the problem. In the Prince v. U.S. decision, Justice Scalia specifically ruled that a law is only and can only be enforced at the state level if it's constitutional. It can only be the supreme law of the land if it's constitutional. So that blows the first argument out of the water. The second argument is easily dealt with as well, that the judiciary is the only branch that can determine what's constitutional. So I asked a simple question to our Attorney General in Washington State. Well, if that's true, why do we take an oath of office? In Article 6 of the Constitution, it requires state legislators to take an oath not only to defend the state constitution, but to defend and uphold the federal constitution. How can I uphold my oath of office if I'm not determining what is and what is not constitutional? Blows that the argument right out of the water. And he didn't have an answer for me and hung up. So, teeth for nullification bills. A lot of people said, Matt, well, okay, the federal government is just going to run right over the top of you. Well, there are a couple things standing in the way of the federal government. What we have put into these bills now are a couple things. The first is a sheriff first clause that says, if a federal agent comes down to enforce that unconstitutional law, fine you, throw you in prison for not buying health insurance under the Obamacare plan, that sheriff can then arrest that federal agent and throw them in the coat. So then that's the first part. The second part is when people say, well, you're just going to cut off the federal funds. I said, well, we got a solution for that. It came from Representative Charles Key, actually. Federal tax escrow account. State governments collect a ton of taxes for the federal government. Probably the most visible to you is the gas tax. You go to the gas pump, a percentage of that you pay goes to the federal government, but the state actually collects it and then cuts a check to the federal government periodically. We just simply said, okay, take that money and divert it into this federal tax escrow account. Federal government, if you want to cut funds off to us, you're not going to get yours. All right? Now, one of the interesting things about that, we're having a discussion right now that why should we just talk about these taxes like at the gas pump, these excise taxes? Why don't we include the income tax? And you think that would get some attention on the issue? Could you imagine an entire state having all their income taxes funneled into the federal tax escrow account at a state level and being held there? It'd bring the federal government to its knees overnight. Just one state would probably do that. These are the kind of things we need to do. We need to call their bluff, and these are the ways we can do it. Some common arguments on these things are, especially the sheriff, first of all, it's going to hamper anti-terrorism efforts. I remember that happening, and we had our leadership, our minority leadership in Washington was on the news when they asked this question. And they said, well, aren't they already coordinating in these task forces anyway? And then it was dead quiet and, next question. The other was, well, what about the IRS? Isn't the IRS just going to get the money anyway, put a lien on your home? Well, who do they have to come through to foreclose or do anything to your home? County sheriff. We're back to the county sheriff again. So these things aren't outlandish. These things are practical things you can do at the local level and the state level to call their bluff. They don't have enough manpower. They don't. They don't have enough resources. The next part of this, regarding the Second Amendment, you probably have heard of the Montana Firearms Freedom Act. We have a Washington Firearms Freedom Act. That has now been passed. I think it's in 9 states now. Simply says this: if a firearm is made in the state and stays in the state, the federal government has no jurisdiction over that firearm. Now, with that, it's an argument over the Commerce Clause, what the definition of commerce is, and that's actually going up right now to the court system, but it doesn't really matter because we go back to the Sheriff First legislation. Wyoming actually had they passed this and they had that on the bill. It doesn't matter what the courts decide. It matters what the Wyoming County Sheriffs do. That's what matters. The next one is the Right to Protection Act. That simply says it doesn't matter what you think, but you cannot track guns or ammunition in state in any way, shape, or form. And in addition to that, we extend the castle doctrine to your person. Where you go with your person is your castle. So some common arguments with this. There's a couple court cases here, but ultimately, how many of you have heard of the Wickard v. Filburn case? Anybody? Nobody. Let me talk to you about that very quickly. In the 1940s, they had all these regulations on farms, right? What the Wickard case said was that the federal government could go in and not only regulate 11 acres of crop that this farmer had grown for commercial use, but could regulate the 11 acres he grew for his own personal use. And they said that was interstate commerce because it had a burden, or could potentially burden, interstate commerce. That was the Wickard case. The Gonzales v. Rage case, very recent, was actually 2005. What that said was the federal government could regulate what you grow in your own backyard. Now, it happened to be marijuana in this particular case, but for many people, we have a home garden, right? We grow other things in our backyard. It sets a very dangerous precedent. But then there was this U.S. v. Lopez case, and that was very interesting. That said that the federal government couldn't pass a law and say, we're doing this to fight crime, because fighting crime wasn't commerce. Okay, so that actually helped us. That helped our side. So we're using that, and I'm going to show you here in a second how we're using that argument to further the cause regarding wolves. Okay? So, I want to talk about something else too. How many of you have read the preamble to the Bill of Rights? Okay, excellent. Here it is. If anybody has any questions that we have a system of limited government, it says it in the preamble to the Bill of Rights. If you haven't read it, you just have. The next step, restoring sound and honest money. 2 ways we want to do that. The very first is send a resolution to Congress telling them to audit and eventually end the Federal Reserve System in the United States. Yeah. The second, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution has never been amended. And that simply says that the federal government must tender payment of all debts in gold and silver. So we're saying as state governments, federal government, if you want to send us any money, we would like it to be in gold and silver. People say, Matt, they're going to cut off funding. Well, then we go back to the federal tax escrow account again. Okay? Common arguments. I've already gone through a couple things, but the one I want to highlight is how will we replace the Federal Reserve? Should we replace the Federal Reserve?
Hell no.
With nothing. Yeah, no, we don't want to replace it.
What did we have before?
Nothing. What we should have is private currency exchange, a free market solution where you have a private currency exchange where you have the currency based and backed by gold and silver, precious metals, and maybe even commodities. There's a way to do that through what's called real bills. Adam Smith actually came up with it. A little bit more complicated, but we're going to be coming out with a plan on that. Very simple solution. We keep saying repeal and replace. I say we don't need to be doing that. Just repeal. Repeal, 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 eliminate, eliminate, eliminate.
Restore free coinage.
Yeah. So the initiative process. So let's say your state legislature won't take these issues up. Well, most state constitutions have allowed the people to be the final legislator if the state legislature won't do what they want them to do. So we've introduced initiative, and we've done it around the country. Missouri, it worked, right? Missouri passed it. So you can actually introduce these bills, and we have them online at my website. We have links, hyperlinks to them. You can take the bill, and you can make it an initiative in your own state. So for instance, in Washington, you need 300,000 signatures to put it on a ballot for an election. That may sound like a lot, but we've been able to do that pretty consistently. In Montana, it's a lot less, as you can see by the numbers. I just wanted to give a couple examples there. We can introduce these things and bring them to the people. And if nothing else, by doing that, it'll be educating the people on what these issues are if they've got to vote on them. Most of the time they say, what the heck is that? They'll go to the voter guide. So it serves a dual purpose doing that. Some folks have said, well, direct democracies, it's dangerous. The people are the final check, though, aren't we? Why aren't we using that power? And then the next argument I've heard people say is, well, if we do that, we'll never be able to talk about it again for decades. I don't know about y'all, but we don't have decades, do we? I think we got about 5 years on the top end of this. I think we need to be exhausting all constitutional options now, right now, across every front we can. So, the county sheriff. So how can you approach your county sheriff? I would recommend going as a group, and we have done this. Go as a group, give him Sheriff Mack's book, talk to the county sheriff, ask him, will he be an oath keeper? Now, Stuart Rhodes has a wonderful organization. If you don't know what that is, Oath Keepers, you can Google it and find it. I should say start page it and find it. Yeah. Also, ask him the hard questions. So we went up to our sheriff and we said this: if the federal government comes down to enforce Obamacare, find somebody, throw them in jail, will you stand between the federal agents and the people? That's the hard question you have to make your sheriffs answer. And we need to ask them those questions. Our sheriff said yes, that he would stand in between. And that was good, but we need to be asking this all over the country. The other part of this, too, is about the public safety or local safety committees. It's a modern-day form of the posse. And actually go on Sheriff Arpaio's site, talks about the posse. So let's say our sheriff says, okay, I'll stand in between the federal agents and the people. He's going to need help to do that, isn't he? So we need to be there for that sheriff. There's another group called VeteranDefenders.org. VeteranDefenders.org, started by Major General Paul Vallely. And his idea was to get all the veterans together to help the sheriffs in these situations. Okay? Because most of us are already trained on how to do these things. Why not at least be there to back the sheriff up when it comes to this? So these are some practical solutions about state sovereignty. I want to talk about other solutions. Land use. Okay? How many of you have ever heard the Kelo decision? Okay, quite a few people. If you don't know about it, the Supreme Court ruled that I can take your private property under eminent domain and I can give it to you, private citizen, if it'll increase the amount of tax revenue coming out of that property. Oh. So we said, hey, Supreme Court, you got that one right. So what we're going to do is we're going to use eminent domain and seize federal land because it's not producing taxes. And they're doing it right now in Utah. So we got to use their arguments against them, and we have to. The other part about is immigration. I'm introducing a bill in Washington State that is going to require, if you go get a driver's license, you have to show a long form birth certificate or other form of citizenship before you get that driver's license. But we want to go one step further. If you go and apply for elected office, to run for elected office, you need to show a long-form birth certificate or other form of citizenship like that to run for elected office. Well, I don't know why we would do that. But it will be interesting in Washington State if we get this passed. The next part of it, we always talk about the illegal immigration problem. What can we do at the state level? You know what we can do at the state level? We can require proof of citizenship before you get any government benefit or any official document issued by the state or its political subdivisions. That would end it very quickly, wouldn't it? Yeah. Seems pretty simple to me. So we're introducing a bill to do that as well.
Go back to California.
We've got a lot of them coming up California to Washington, so if they go back to California, at least we're getting them halfway there. But wolves. Remember I talked about commerce, of what is commerce? Our argument is simply wolves are not commerce, federal government. Therefore, if a wolf is off federal land, it's open season.
That's good.
Yeah.
And this has met a lot of consternation, and there are some crazy websites out there where people believe wolves are more important than human beings. I mean, it's just, it's insanity, quite frankly. The other part of that with the wolves is we're going to be doing that in Montana, we're going to be doing Washington and Idaho. I think you can do this with other endangered species as well, so don't just think wolf when we think about this, okay? Think about how you can assert state sovereignty regarding other endangered species, and I use that in quotes, the federal government is trying to regulate, okay? So, I wanted to throw this in here. I always do because I think it's important that we understand where these things come from. I mean, we're not inventing something new. It's for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. You, my brothers, were called to be free. Now, and then the Scottish Declaration of Independence. A lot of people don't even know this exists, but it's a wonderful document. It is in truth not for glory nor riches nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. Ultimately, we have one challenge before us, and that challenge is simply this. What are we willing, each and every one of us, what are we willing to sacrifice for freedom? The answer to that question, our answer to that question, is either going to be suffered or praised by our children and grandchildren. And I pray that the Lord would give us the strength and the courage to answer that question like our founding fathers did, with everything. Because that's ultimately what this is all about. And I hope this encourages you that we're moving in the right direction. If you have any questions about this, I'll be available afterwards to talk about it. I think I can take a few questions now if we have a little bit of time, but I want to say thank you very much and for listening to me, and God bless each and every one of you.